Though legally abolished in 1865, slavery's psychological and cultural impacts still influence language, behavior, and self-perception today. Picture this. More than a century and a half has passed since the Emancipation Proclamation. Yet echoes of that painful era still ripple through our daily lives. We walk city streets lit by modern technology, scroll through our phones, and speak in the language of the present, but hidden beneath the surface are habits, phrases, and assumptions shaped by a time when human beings were treated as property. These are not just dusty lessons in a textbook. They are living imprints, woven into the words we speak, the fashions we follow, and even the way we see ourselves. Think of it like a tree that was cut down but left with roots deep underground. The branches may be gone, but those roots keep growing, quietly altering the soil for generations. Slavery's roots have done the same. They have stretched through families, neighborhoods, schools, and media, influencing the stories we tell and the stereotypes we carry, often without even realizing it. Today we will uncover how those hidden legacies still shape the present. We will explore the ways history whispers through our culture, from the origins of common slang to the quiet persistence of myths about identity and worth. This is not about guilt. It is about awareness. Because when we shine a light on the shadows of the past, we give ourselves the power to break free from them. As you listen, consider how these unseen chains might appear in your own life or community. Ask yourself, what assumptions have I inherited? What stories have I accepted without question? Awareness is the first step toward change, and knowledge is a kind of freedom no one can take away. If these insights spark something in you, if they open your eyes or challenge the way you think, help us spread the message. Hit the like button to let others know this conversation matters. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, so you won't miss the next chapter of this journey into our shared history. Together, we can keep learning, keep questioning, and keep moving toward a more honest and empowered future. Let us begin the exploration. The past is not as far away as it seems, and understanding it is the key to shaping a better tomorrow. As we journey deeper into the hidden legacies of slavery, it is impossible to ignore the power that language carries, shaping not only how we communicate but how we think about ourselves and others. Words are not merely sounds or letters. They are vessels of memory, sometimes carrying stories so painful that most people have no idea they are repeating a piece of history every time they speak. One of the most shocking examples of this lies in a common curse word many people toss around without a second thought, a word that has become a casual punctuation in music, film, and everyday conversation. Yet behind its modern usage is a history of unimaginable cruelty. A calculated act of psychological warfare designed to strip human beings of their dignity and to plant seeds of self-loathing that would last for generations. During the darkest years of American slavery, when enslaved people were treated not as human beings but as property, the system of oppression relied on more than chains and whips. It sought to crush not only the body but also the spirit. Enslavers understood that breaking a person's will was more effective than any physical punishment, because once the spirit was broken, the person could be controlled without constant force. Among the most horrifying tactics used to achieve this was a punishment so dehumanizing that even now, centuries later, it casts a shadow over our culture. When an enslaved man showed courage, perhaps by attempting to escape, by refusing to submit, or by standing up in defiance, those who held power sometimes responded with a punishment designed not merely to hurt, but to annihilate his sense of self. The man would be forced into an act so cruel that it defies imagination. He was coerced into violating the sacred bonds of his own family. This atrocity was not just about physical violation. It was a deliberate attack on the core of identity, an effort to destroy the very idea of manhood and to shatter the deepest human connections. Families were often made to witness the ordeal. ensuring that the humiliation and trauma would spread beyond the immediate victim. The enslavers knew that when you poison the trust between a mother and a son, when you turn love itself into a weapon, you fracture the heart of a community. The torment did not end with the act itself. Those who were forced through this nightmare were often branded by words meant to mock and degrade them. Words that over time evolved into the very curse we hear casually spoken today. What began as a tool of domination eventually seeped into everyday language, detached from its origin but still carrying an invisible residue of pain. Centuries later, people may use the term without any awareness of its roots, thinking it is nothing more than a colorful expression of frustration or bravado. But hidden in those syllables is the echo of a crime meant to break the human spirit. It is a striking example of how the past survives in ways we rarely question. Just as the roots of a long-felled tree can continue to twist and reshape the soil, the words forged in cruelty can continue to shape our culture and our minds. We inherit language like we inherit stories, and when those stories are born in violence, they can quietly influence how we see ourselves and each other. The casual use of such a word becomes, without intent, a kind of unknowing participation in the very degradation it was designed to inflict. Understanding this history does not mean that every modern speaker of the word is consciously repeating an ancient insult. But awareness invites responsibility. To know the origin is to recognize that some words are more than just words. They are artifacts of suffering, reminders of how deeply oppression sought to invade even the most intimate spaces of human life. When we speak without awareness, we risk carrying forward a legacy of harm that was carefully constructed to diminish a people's sense of worth. This revelation is not meant to silence anyone but to awaken a deeper consciousness. Language has always been a powerful force for both harm and healing. The very same tongue that once repeated the words of an oppressor can also choose words of restoration. By understanding the true origin of this curse, we gain the ability to reclaim our language, to speak with intention, and to honor those whose dignity was assaulted by refusing to let their pain be reduced to a careless expletive. Imagine for a moment what it would mean to shift our habits in light of this knowledge. To pause before repeating a phrase whose history is soaked in humiliation. To replace it with expressions that carry strength rather than echoes of cruelty. Each time we make that choice, we are not simply being polite. We are breaking a link in a chain that was forged to enslave both body and mind. In the larger story of how slavery's shadows remain with us, this example stands as a reminder that the struggle for freedom is not only about laws or visible chains, but also about the unseen forces that shape our thoughts and our speech. The words we choose can either keep old wounds open or help them begin to heal. By uncovering the hidden history of even a single word, we begin to reclaim power over our narrative and to honor the resilience of those who survived the unthinkable. This act of awareness is itself a form of liberation, a quiet yet profound rejection of the very system that once sought to define us. The story of how the past still breathes through our present continues with another unsettling revelation, one that lingers not just in our language, but in the clothes we wear and the styles we celebrate. We often think of fashion as an expression of freedom, of personal taste and cultural pride. Yet even the choices we make in what we wear can carry the invisible fingerprints of history. One of the most recognizable street styles of the last few decades, loose, sagging pants, has become a global trend, a symbol in music videos, youth culture, and urban identity. For many, it represents rebellion or cool detachment from mainstream norms. But hidden behind this modern image is a story few know. A story that began not in the clubs or the streets of the late 20th century, but in the brutal plantations of the 18th and 19th centuries. In the world of American slavery, power was enforced not only through chains and whips, but through psychological terror designed to break a person's dignity and rewrite their very sense of self. Enslavers understood that to truly dominate someone, you had to strip away not just freedom but also pride, identity, and the sacred right to control one's own body. Among the many cruel tactics devised to enforce submission was a practice so horrifying that it left scars not only on the individuals who endured it but on the cultural memory of their descendants. This method, known in whispered histories as buck breaking, targeted enslaved men with an act of calculated humiliation meant to send a message to the entire community. When an enslaved man was seen as defiant, too strong-willed, or simply too proud to be easily controlled, those in power sometimes resorted to this form of punishment. In front of family members, in front of his own children or neighbors, he would be subjected to an assault that sought not merely to hurt his body, but to destroy his spirit. This was not random cruelty. It was a deliberate strategy to dismantle the idea of manhood, to make others witness his powerlessness and fear that the same fate awaited them. The humiliation was not a private wound but a public spectacle, a warning meant to echo through generations. After enduring such an ordeal, the man was often forced to wear his humiliation in a way that could not be hidden. Loose, sagging pants garments deliberately ill-fitting became a visible marker of what he had suffered. What for him was a sign of degradation was also a constant reminder to others of the consequences of defiance. The enslavers turned clothing into a weapon, turning the very fabric that covered the body into an emblem of control and disgrace. This is the bitter root from which a style we now see in music, sports, and youth culture originally grew. Centuries later, that style would resurface in entirely different circumstances, carried forward without the weight of its original meaning. In prisons, where belts were often prohibited, loose pants became common for practical reasons. From there, the look moved into street fashion, and by the late 20th century it had become a statement of urban cool. Artists, athletes, and young people across the world adopted sagging pants as a way to signal independence and nonconformity, unaware that the image they were embracing carried echoes of a much darker history. What began as an act of forced humiliation eventually transformed into a fashion trend celebrated in music videos and mainstream culture. Yet the past lingers in ways that most wearers never suspect. This hidden story does not mean that every person who wears sagging pants is somehow complicit in old crimes or that the style should be shamed. Instead, it challenges us to look deeper, to see how the legacy of oppression can live on in symbols we believe we have chosen freely. Fashion, like language, is a vessel of memory. It can be an act of resistance or an unknowing repetition of a past that once sought to strip people of their humanity. To understand this is to reclaim the narrative, to recognize that what was once used to humiliate can now be worn with knowledge and transformed into something that honors the resilience of those who endured. When we connect this story to the lingering echoes of words that carry the pain of forced degradation, we begin to see the pattern. Slavery did not end with the signing of a law in 1865. Its psychological and cultural fingerprints remain on the language we speak, the styles we adopt, and the ways we see ourselves. The same system that turned a cruel punishment into a visible mark of shame also left behind words and symbols that traveled through time, eventually detaching from their origin while still holding the vibration of their first use. These traces remind us that the struggle for dignity is not only a matter of history but of present consciousness. By uncovering the truth behind such a familiar fashion trend, we are invited to look beyond the surface and to ask harder questions about the culture we inherit. The goal is not to judge or to scold, but to awaken awareness. To wear something with full knowledge of its history is different from wearing it in ignorance. Awareness gives us power, the power to reclaim, to redefine, and to honor the strength of those who came before us. The sagging pants that once symbolized a forced and public humiliation can, when understood, become a reminder of survival, a quiet testament to the endurance of a people who endured the unthinkable and yet continued to create, to inspire, and to live. In bringing these hidden histories to light, we are not only exploring the pain of the past, but also choosing to break the silence that allows such stories to be forgotten. Just as words shaped by suffering can be transformed into messages of resilience, so too can a fashion trend born of humiliation be reframed as a lesson in awareness and a call to remember. The chains of the past may no longer be visible, but their echoes live on in the most unexpected places, sometimes in the very clothes we wear. As we peel back the layers of this hidden history, we come to another wound that continues to shape the present, a wound carved not only into language and fashion, but into the very way society views black women. For centuries, the narrative surrounding black womanhood was deliberately distorted, twisted by those who sought to justify their own cruelty. Enslavers did not simply exploit black women's labor, they also violated their bodies, and to excuse this brutality they crafted a myth so persistent that it still lingers today. They spread the idea that black women were inherently hypersexual, driven by uncontrollable desire, and therefore could not be victims of abuse. This poisonous lie served a double purpose. It excused the crimes of those in power and placed the weight of shame on the very women who were being harmed. In the world of slavery, every injustice required a story to mask it. Slaveholders understood that their system of forced labor and ownership was not only a physical institution, but also a psychological one. To maintain control, they needed to rewrite morality itself. They needed to convince themselves and those around them that their acts of violence were natural, even inevitable. And so they created a narrative that black women were not truly victims because they were somehow, always, willing, that their bodies were different and their desires excessive. This lie became the silent partner of their crimes, allowing them to assault and exploit without confronting the reality of their own brutality. For the women who lived through this, the damage was unbearable. They were trapped in a system where their pain was denied before it was even spoken. Their humanity was questioned, their cries for justice erased by a stereotype designed to silence them. This was not just an act of physical domination, but of psychological erasure, a way to turn human beings into caricatures, so that the oppressors could continue their violence without the burden of conscience. The myth of the hypersexual black woman became a weapon, just as powerful as the chains and the whip, because it made the suffering of these women invisible and their dignity easy to dismiss. The end of legal slavery in 1865 did not dissolve this narrative. Like a shadow cast across generations, it followed black women into the new century, reshaping itself to fit the times. In the era of minstrel shows and early cinema, the stereotype appeared again in the form of exaggerated characters, seductive, exotic, and dangerous. In newspapers, novels, and later in Hollywood films, black women were often portrayed as temptresses or as figures whose sexuality needed to be controlled. Even as the world changed and the fight for civil rights gained momentum, these old images lingered, quietly influencing how society perceived black women's bodies and their worth. This myth did more than distort perception. It affected real lives. Black women seeking justice for sexual violence often found their experiences dismissed, their credibility questioned, because the stereotype whispered that they were somehow responsible for the harm done to them. In workplaces, schools, and courtrooms, echoes of the slaveholders' justification persisted, making it harder for black women to be seen as victims or to be heard as survivors. The stereotype shaped how the media covered their stories and how society reacted to their pain. It became a barrier not just to justice, but to the full recognition of their humanity. Even today, in music videos, advertising, and television, traces of that old narrative can still be found. The images are more subtle now, the language more polished, but the underlying message sometimes remains. The idea that black women are defined by their sexuality, that their worth is tied to their bodies, that their desires or their style somehow invite scrutiny. These cultural echoes are not harmless. They are the modern faces of a lie that began on the plantations. To recognize this history is to see how deep the roots of oppression run. The same system that gave us words born of humiliation and fashion trends born of violence also planted myths designed to shape how black women would be seen long after slavery ended. These myths were not accidents. They were tools of power, carefully crafted to control both the oppressor and the oppressed, to make cruelty seem natural and to keep the victims of that cruelty forever on the defensive. Yet understanding this story also reveals another truth. Black women have always resisted these narratives, even when their voices were silenced or their experiences denied. From the women who risked everything to tell their stories in the 19th century to the activists, writers, and artists who continue to challenge stereotypes today, there is a long tradition of reclaiming dignity and rewriting the narrative. The defiance is itself a testament to resilience, a refusal to be defined by the lies of those who sought to break them. When we connect this history to the broader tapestry of slavery's lasting legacy, from the hidden pain in our language to the unseen meaning in our fashion, we begin to see how the past continues to shape the present in ways we cannot ignore. These are not just isolated stories of cruelty, but interconnected threads of a system designed to dehumanize at every level. By exposing these truths, we honor the memory of those who suffered, and we challenge the stereotypes that still echo in modern culture. Awareness is not simply an act of learning, it is an act of justice. By understanding where these myths come from, we gain the power to reject them and to create a culture that sees black women fully, beyond the distortions of history. Each time we question a stereotype, each time we tell the true story, we break another link in a chain that was forged to diminish and control. In doing, we not only reclaim the dignity of the past, but help shape a future where the humanity of every person is finally recognized. The long shadow of slavery has never been confined to the centuries when it was legally sanctioned. Its echoes have resurfaced again and again, shaping not only how people speak and dress, but how entire nations debate policy and define morality. Even after the Emancipation Proclamation and the ratification of the 13th Amendment, the myths created to justify the oppression of black people did not simply disappear. Instead, they lay in wait, ready to be reawakened whenever it served those in power. One of the most enduring of these myths was the accusation of laziness, a stereotype invented in the age of plantations to explain away the cruelty of forced labor and to depict enslaved Africans as inherently inferior. This lie, designed to rationalize the exploitation of human beings who in reality performed backbreaking work from sunrise to sunset, would prove remarkably durable. In the decades following the end of legal slavery, the image of the so-called idle black worker became a political tool, repurposed to limit freedom and maintain social hierarchies. After Reconstruction, when formerly enslaved men and women sought education, land, and a place in civic life, this stereotype was used to justify the stripping away of rights and the imposition of Jim Crow laws. It painted black ambition as a threat and black poverty as a moral failing. By the 20th century, the language surrounding this myth had shifted, but its purpose remained the same: to cast doubt on the worthiness of black citizens and to question their right to share in the nation's resources. The 1970s brought a new chapter in this old story. As the United States faced economic uncertainty and political upheaval, debates over social programs became a battleground for ideas about race, responsibility, and the role of government. Politicians searching for support discovered that the ancient stereotype of black laziness could be repackaged for modern times. With carefully chosen words and calculated images, they revived the same accusations once whispered by slaveholders. Instead of openly defending slavery, they spoke of welfare dependency, a welfare queens, and of people who supposedly lived off the labor of others. These phrases were not neutral. They were coded signals, designed to stir resentment and to link government aid with blackness in the public imagination. Even though the majority of recipients of programs like food assistance were, and remain, white, Television news clips and campaign speeches repeated images of urban poverty that focused almost exclusively on black faces, creating a false association that hardened in the public mind. The strategy was subtle enough to be denied yet powerful enough to shift the national conversation. By painting social programs as a handout to people who refused to work, politicians undermined support for policies that lifted millions of families of every race out of hardship. The old slave-era lie of idleness had simply been given a modern costume, one that fit neatly into the politics of the era. This tactic not only reshaped public opinion, but also rewrote the moral narrative around poverty. Instead of recognizing the structural causes of economic inequality such as job loss, discrimination, or inadequate wages, many Americans were encouraged to see poverty as a personal failure, and particularly as a racialized one. Black communities became the symbolic face of dependency, even when statistics consistently revealed that white Americans made up the largest share of those receiving public assistance. The facts were secondary to the power of the stereotype. The damage went beyond policy debates. Just as the myth of hypersexual black women had distorted perceptions of womanhood, and the fashion trend rooted in forced humiliation had been stripped of its history, so too this accusation of laziness quietly shaped how generations of Americans understood race and work. It became an unspoken assumption in workplaces, schools, and neighborhoods, influencing hiring decisions, educational expectations, and the way people interpreted success and failure. The stereotype created during slavery, meant to excuse the exploitation of the very people who labored the hardest, now functioned as a weapon to deny them equality in a supposedly free society. When we trace these threads together, the hidden origins of a curse word, the cruel spectacle of forced humiliation turned into a fashion trend, the myth of black women's supposed hypersexuality, we see how each piece is part of a larger pattern. The past did not vanish when slavery ended. It was absorbed into the culture, where it could be revived whenever power demanded. Language, clothing, media images, and political rhetoric all carry echoes of the same system, reshaping old lies into new forms. Yet exposing these connections is not an exercise in despair. It is an act of reclaiming truth. By understanding how these myths were created and how they have been used, we can begin to dismantle their influence. Recognizing that the stereotype of laziness was a calculated invention, and that it persists despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, allows us to challenge the narratives that divide us and to demand policies based on reality rather than fear. Awareness of this history also gives us the opportunity to honor those whose labor and resilience were denied recognition. The men and women who survived slavery worked under conditions almost unimaginable today, yet they were branded as idle to excuse their oppression. Their descendants have continued to build, create, and contribute to every part of society while still confronting the weight of a lie that refuses to die. To name that lie and to see how it was deliberately resurrected is to break its power. The story of slavery's legacy is not only a chronicle of suffering, but also a testament to survival. Each time we uncover a hidden truth, whether it is buried in our language, our culture, or our politics, we weaken the hold of myths that have shaped our world for too long. The accusation of laziness, revived in the political battles of the 1970s, is one more reminder that the fight for justice is not just about the past. It is about the stories we choose to believe today. By rejecting the old narratives and replacing them with truth, we continue the work of liberation begun generations ago, ensuring that the voices once silenced will not remain unheard. The myths that survived the end of slavery did not linger only in the words of politicians or in the public debate about poverty. They seeped into hearts and minds, shaping how people of African descent came to see themselves and one another. Among the most insidious legacies was the deliberate cultivation of division within the black community itself, a strategy designed by enslavers to weaken solidarity and to ensure that those once enslaved would carry the weight of internal conflict long after legal bondage had ended. to maintain control over a population that vastly outnumbered them. Enslavers discovered that brute force alone was not enough. They needed to fracture trust, to reward those who distanced themselves from their own culture, and to plant seeds of doubt that would grow into generations of self-questioning. During the long night of slavery, it became common practice for those in power to favor individuals who imitated the speech, manners, or customs of the dominant white society. Enslaved people who spoke in ways that mirrored their captors or who disavowed African traditions were sometimes given lighter work or slightly better living conditions. They were used as intermediaries, their privileges a tool to remind others of the supposed benefits of rejecting their own heritage. This strategy was not an accident. It was a carefully calculated form of psychological control. By rewarding those who turned away from the rhythms, languages, and spiritual practices of their ancestors, enslavers planted the idea that proximity to whiteness was the only road to safety and success. When emancipation finally came, the invisible scaffolding of this strategy remained. In the years of Reconstruction and beyond, Black communities struggled not only against the external forces of segregation and violence, but also against the internalized messages that whiteness equaled worth. Over time, these messages evolved into what we now call internalized racism and colorism. Lighter skin was often prized, not because it held any real value, but because it had once been treated as a ticket to gentler treatment on the plantation and later to slightly easier passage through a segregated society. Darker skin, in contrast, became burdened with unfair stereotypes, as though the shade of one's complexion determined character or intellect. These attitudes, born in the cruelty of slavery, did not simply disappear with the civil rights movement. They found new life in schools, workplaces, and even in families. Children sometimes grew up hearing compliments or criticisms tied to the lightness of their skin, as though a trait determined at birth could measure worth. In subtle ways, this hierarchy taught generations to view themselves through a distorted mirror. The belief that speaking a certain way or dressing in a certain style, what some call talking white, could open doors became both a survival strategy and a source of pain. On one hand, adapting to the dominant culture offered a means to navigate institutions that often punished visible difference. On the other hand, it reinforced the false message that Black culture was something to hide or outgrow. This tension has played out in countless personal stories. A young student in a predominantly white school might find that her careful grammar and polished speech are praised as exceptional, not simply competent, as though excellence were unexpected. Another child might be teased by peers for sounding too proper, caught between worlds that each demand a different performance. What began as a tactic of survival on the plantation became a quiet battle within Black identity, where every choice of accent or vocabulary could be misread as betrayal or as proof of ambition. These wounds are complex because they are both personal and systemic. They do not stem from weakness but from centuries of deliberate manipulation. Enslavers understood that to rule effectively, they had to shape not only the external lives of the enslaved but their inner landscapes. By rewarding rejection of African traditions, and by praising those who mimicked the speech of their oppressors, they laid the groundwork for generations of internal struggle. The belief that success requires sounding or behaving white is not merely a misunderstanding. It is the residue of a strategy designed to make freedom feel conditional and to make cultural pride seem like a liability. When we place this story beside the other hidden legacies, the distortion of language in a common curse word, the fashion rooted in humiliation, the stereotypes that misrepresented Black women, and the political manipulation of the 1970s, we see a pattern emerge. Each example reveals how the past continues to shape the present, how the roots of slavery have pushed up through the soil of modern life in unexpected places. Just as the myth of laziness was revived to justify cutting social programs, so too the myth that whiteness is the standard of success continues to haunt our perceptions of education, professionalism, and even beauty. But recognizing this history is not an invitation to despair. It is a call to reclaim what was deliberately obscured, the voices of ancestors who carried songs, languages, and traditions across oceans and through centuries of oppression did not vanish. They live in music, art, storytelling, and the vibrant creativity of Black communities around the world. To honor that inheritance is to refuse the lie that one must abandon it to succeed, to speak with confidence in one's own rhythms, to celebrate the full spectrum of Black skin tones, and to define success on one's own terms is an act of resistance and of healing. Breaking free from this internalized hierarchy does not mean rejecting the tools of education or the ability to communicate across cultures. It means recognizing that eloquence and knowledge are not the property of any race, and that speaking with clarity is not a performance of whiteness but a human skill that belongs to everyone. It means seeing beauty and strength in every shade of Blackness and refusing to measure worth by standards designed to diminish. The same society that once tried to erase Black culture cannot define its future. By uncovering the deliberate strategies that sowed division, we take the first step toward unity and pride. The roots of internalized racism were planted by those who feared Black strength. To name those roots and to understand their origin is to loosen their grip. In doing, the descendants of those once enslaved can claim the fullness of their identity without apology, carrying forward a legacy not of imitation or survival alone but of resilience, creativity, and unbreakable dignity. The story of racial history is not just a record of laws and events, but also a story of how language and attitudes have been shaped to hide the very real scars of inequality. And one of the most subtle yet powerful phrases that has emerged from this legacy is the seemingly harmless declaration, "I do not see color." At first glance it sounds like an invitation to unity, a call to look beyond the surface of human difference. Yet when placed against the backdrop of centuries of discrimination, it becomes clear that this phrase does not erase prejudice. It masks. Generations of people endured the brutality of forced labor, were denied education, and were subjected to carefully constructed myths designed to keep them at the margins of society. They were told that their culture was inferior, their bodies were to be exploited, and their very identity was something to be erased or rewritten. The scars of that history did not simply vanish with new laws or a few decades of civil rights movements. Instead, they seeped into the structures of schools, workplaces, neighborhoods, and even into the assumptions that shape daily conversation. When someone says, "I do not see color," it may feel to them like a statement of fairness or a rejection of old prejudices. But to those who live with the daily reality of discrimination, it often feels like a refusal to acknowledge the truth. It is as if the long struggle of those who fought for recognition, for the right to vote, to learn, to own property, to simply exist without fear, is being quietly brushed aside. Color has never been the problem. The problem has always been the way society has chosen to attach meaning to it, building systems of privilege and exclusion on something as arbitrary as skin tone. To claim not to see color is to overlook how these systems still operate, how hiring practices, school funding, housing opportunities, and even healthcare outcomes continue to reflect deep racial divides. It is like looking at a wound and insisting that, because you do not see it bleed today, it must have healed. The phrase also erases the richness of culture and the value of identity. Black communities, like many others, have cultivated art, music, literature, and traditions that carry the wisdom of survival and the beauty of resilience. These are not just aesthetic contributions. They are living testaments to endurance and creativity in the face of oppression. To say you do not see color is to risk ignoring this heritage, to flatten the very textures that make society vibrant. It is a denial of the work of countless ancestors who insisted on preserving their language, their faith, and their stories even when enslavers tried to strip them away. It is also a missed opportunity for everyone to learn from that history and to build relationships rooted not in the pretense of sameness, but in the respect of difference. Honest conversations about race are not comfortable. They require listening to painful truths and accepting that inequality is not just a relic of the past, but a living reality. This is why pretending that race does not matter can be so harmful. It closes the door on dialogue before it even begins. When we say we do not see color, we are, perhaps without intending to, telling those who experience discrimination that their experiences are invisible, that their struggles are theirs alone to carry and not worthy of collective attention. Yet the very progress society has made from the end of legal segregation to the expansion of civil rights protections has only ever come when people were willing to see the truth clearly and to name it. To create a more just world, it is not enough to avoid overt prejudice. We must also confront the quiet habits of thought that allow inequality to persist. This means acknowledging the full history of how race has shaped laws, economies, and everyday life. It means recognizing that while individuals may wish to treat everyone the same, society does not yet offer the same opportunities or protections to all. Seeing color is not about judging someone by their appearance. It is about understanding the context in which that appearance has been used to grant or deny rights, to open or close doors. In every generation there have been those who insisted on looking away, claiming that the struggle for equality was already won, that the work of justice was complete. Yet history teaches that progress stalls when we look away and that silence is not neutrality. It is through the willingness to see color, to acknowledge the long shadow of history, and to speak honestly about systemic inequality that we honor the resilience of those who came before and create the possibility of a better future, choosing to truly see each other, our histories, our cultures, our struggles, and our strengths is not a step backward into division. It is the only path toward genuine unity. Centuries after the formal end of slavery, its echoes still shape lives in ways that cannot be captured by dates in a history book or by the signing of amendments and civil rights legislation. The legacy of bondage is not only written in the economic disparities and legal battles that followed, but also in the quieter, often invisible struggles carried in the minds and hearts of those descended from the enslaved. Psychologists and historians have given this intergenerational burden a name: post-traumatic slave syndrome, and while the term might sound clinical, it speaks to something deeply human. The way trauma, when left unacknowledged and unhealed, finds new ways to live on. The whips and chains are gone, yet the psychological patterns they forged have not vanished. They have merely changed form, becoming part of the unspoken inheritance passed from one generation to the next. Imagine what it meant to survive in a world where every aspect of existence was dictated by someone else's will, where family bonds could be severed at the auction block, where the very expression of grief or anger could invite punishment. Survival demanded adaptation, and adaptation often meant learning to distrust strangers, to guard emotions, to bury pain behind a mask of resilience. These were not flaws, they were strategies for staying alive. But when those strategies are repeated for centuries and handed down like an heirloom, they become habits of mind and heart. Children grow up absorbing not only the stories of struggle but also the silent cues. The wariness in a parent's glance, the careful calculation before speaking, the deep-seated belief that the world is not safe. Even when legal chains are broken, these lessons remain, shaping how people see themselves and how they navigate a society that has not fully reckoned with its past. The anger that sometimes surfaces in Black communities, often misread as hostility, is part of this inheritance. It is not aimless rage. It is the residue of generations who were told their lives had little value and who were forced to suppress their natural human response to injustice. Likewise, the wounds to self-esteem did not appear out of thin air. They were cultivated by a system that for hundreds of years insisted, in law and in culture, that Black people were less than human. When a society repeats such messages for so long, they seep into the collective consciousness, creating doubts that linger even when those messages are no longer spoken aloud. This is not weakness. It is the predictable outcome of centuries of dehumanization. Recognizing this does not mean accepting these wounds as permanent, but it does require an honest understanding of where they come from. Distrust, too, has roots in survival. For people whose ancestors were betrayed by governments, churches, and neighbors, caution became a form of wisdom. To question authority and to be wary of promises was not cynicism, it was protection. Even today, when communities encounter disparities in policing, education, or health care, this inherited caution feels justified. It is not the product of paranoia, but of memory carried in family stories, in the very way elders teach children how to move through the world. Post-traumatic slave syndrome is not about blaming the present for the past. It is about seeing how the past quietly shapes the present. This psychological legacy also intersects with the myth society has clung to, myths that deny the reality of ongoing inequality. Just as the claim "I do not see color" pretends that history has no bearing on today, ignoring the wounds of slavery allows people to believe that any current disparities are simply the result of individual choices. But the persistence of certain patterns, economic gaps, unequal access to opportunity, the mistrust of institutions cannot be explained by personal failings. They are the natural consequence of trauma passed down and never fully addressed. To confront them, we must resist the temptation to look away or to insist that time alone heals all wounds. Healing begins when stories are told and heard. It begins when communities acknowledge both the pain and the extraordinary resilience that has accompanied it. The very survival of Black culture, the art, music, language, and faith traditions that flourish despite every attempt to silence them is itself a testament to the strength that coexists with trauma. The same history that gave rise to inherited anger and mistrust also gave rise to profound creativity, to movements for justice, to a relentless insistence on human dignity. To understand post-traumatic slave syndrome is not to reduce a people to their pain. It is to honor the complexity of their journey, and to recognize the courage it takes to transform inherited wounds into a source of collective strength. The work of healing belongs not only to those who bear the scars but to the broader society that once inflicted them and now benefits from their invisibility. True reconciliation demands more than polite words or superficial gestures. It requires facing the hard truth that the past is not past. It lives in the psyche, in the unspoken lessons passed from parent to child, in the structures that still reflect old hierarchies. Only when we name this reality can we begin to dismantle it. Only when we see that anger, low self-esteem, and distrust are not personal defects but historical consequences can we create space for genuine healing. To break the cycle, we must create environments where trust can grow, where self-worth is affirmed, and where the long silent stories of ancestors are not only remembered but celebrated. This is how the weight of inherited trauma begins to lift, not by denying it, not by pretending that the present is untouched by the past, but by facing it together with honesty and compassion. In doing, we not only honor those who endured the unimaginable, but also ensure that the shadow of their suffering no longer dictates the future. While the wounds of slavery echo across generations, they are not the only inheritance passed down through time. Alongside the pain and the heavy silence left by centuries of oppression, there flows a parallel current of resilience, creativity, and cultural brilliance that has shaped communities and inspired the world. The same ancestors who bore unspeakable suffering also forged ways to survive with dignity, to nurture hope when hope seemed impossible, and to create art, music, and traditions that would outlast the systems designed to break them. Their story is not solely one of trauma, but also of a strength so profound that it continues to nourish the descendants of those who endured. In the darkest chapters of history, where every attempt was made to strip them of identity and humanity, enslaved people wove together songs and rhythms that carried both sorrow and defiance. Spirituals became coded messages of freedom, their melodies whispering escape routes and hidden dreams. These songs were not mere entertainment. They were survival strategies, tools of communication, and expressions of faith in a future beyond bondage. Long after the chains were gone, these sounds evolved into blues, jazz, gospel, and later hip-hop forms of music that not only comforted their own communities, but reshaped the entire cultural landscape. Each note carries within it the testimony of those who refused to be silenced, turning anguish into art that still resonates across oceans and generations. The creativity extended far beyond music. In kitchens where meager rations demanded ingenuity, enslaved cooks transformed limited ingredients into dishes so rich in flavor and tradition that they now define regional cuisines and family gatherings. What began as an act of survival has become a beloved cultural gift, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, human beings can create joy and meaning from what is available. Storytelling too became a lifeline, with folk tales and oral histories passing on wisdom, cautionary lessons, and a sense of belonging. Characters like Brer Rabbit embodied cleverness and wit, teaching children that intelligence and humor could outmaneuver cruelty. These tales continue to echo in literature and art, proof that imagination could flourish even under the weight of oppression. Beyond the visible expressions of art and food, the survival skills inherited from enslaved ancestors are deeply woven into the character of their descendants. The ability to adapt quickly, to read the subtle shifts in society, to build strong networks of mutual support, these are not merely traits of individual families. They are the living evidence of strategies developed when survival depended on community and quick thinking. The instinct to protect one another, to celebrate victories large and small, and to maintain faith in the face of adversity remains a quiet but powerful force. It has fueled movements for civil rights, inspired political and social change, and sustained a sense of unity that reaches far beyond bloodlines. This resilience is mirrored in the cultural confidence that continues to grow, even when society has tried to diminish it. Fashion, language, and art forms rooted in African heritage have not only endured, but have become sources of global inspiration. The vibrant patterns of African-inspired textiles, the rhythmic cadences of African-American vernacular English, the dynamic styles of dance and performance, these are not remnants of a lost past. They are living traditions, constantly evolving and influencing the world at large. They serve as daily reminders that culture is not something that can be erased by oppression. It is a force that adapts, survives, and thrives. The strength inherited from ancestors who endured slavery also shows itself in the determination to pursue education and opportunity despite systemic barriers. From the first generations who sought literacy in secret to today's scholars, artists, and leaders, there is a through line of courage and ambition. This is not merely the story of individual achievement, but of a collective drive to reclaim agency and define identity on one's own terms. That drive has built institutions, reshaped politics, and inspired others to recognize that dignity and excellence cannot be permanently suppressed. Even the deep communal faith traditions, whether expressed through church congregations, neighborhood gatherings, or modern movements for social justice, reveal how spiritual and emotional strength have been passed down. The belief that a better future can be built through solidarity and hope has outlasted every attempt to extinguish it. These traditions continue to offer a sense of belonging and purpose, helping communities navigate the challenges of the present while honoring the sacrifices of the past. Acknowledging these inherited gifts does not erase the pain of the trauma. Instead, it paints a more complete picture of the legacy. The very existence of post-traumatic slave syndrome speaks to wounds that remain unhealed. But alongside those scars are the muscles of resilience, the creativity that refuses to be stifled, and the cultural richness that continues to flourish. To see only the pain is to miss the remarkable capacity for renewal and the enduring power of the human spirit. This dual inheritance of trauma and of strength asks us to hold two truths at once. The past inflicted lasting harm, but it also cultivated extraordinary resourcefulness. The descendants of the enslaved carry in their very being the evidence that human creativity and determination can transform suffering into a legacy of triumph. By honoring both sides of this inheritance, we not only give full respect to those who came before but also recognize the profound lessons they offer for everyone. That even in the face of relentless oppression, the human spirit can create beauty, build culture, and pass down a strength that endures long after the chains have fallen away. By acknowledging these hidden legacies, embracing Black identity, and dismantling systemic racism, society can begin to break the mental chains that have quietly bound us for generations and move toward a freedom that is deeper than law or policy. True freedom is not simply the absence of legal oppression. It is the presence of dignity, equality, and understanding. It requires a collective willingness to look unflinchingly at the past, to name the injustices that shaped our present, and to recognize how those patterns continue to influence our thoughts, our institutions, and even the language we use today. The stories we have uncovered of pain and resilience, of trauma and creativity are not relics of some distant age. They are living truths, pulsing beneath the surface of our daily lives. They explain why some wounds still ache in communities that have fought for centuries to be heard, and why certain myths about worth and identity persist long after their origins have faded from public memory. When we bring these legacies into the light, we do more than honor the ancestors who endured the unimaginable. We give ourselves the chance to heal what has long remained unspoken. Healing begins when we listen, when we allow the echoes of history to teach us not only about the cruelty that once reigned, but also about the incredible strength that survived it. Breaking the mental chains also means rejecting the false comfort of saying, "I do not see color." Color is part of the human story. It is part of what makes us unique. To pretend otherwise is to deny both the beauty of difference and the realities of inequality. Instead, we must learn to see clearly, to see how inherited trauma shapes behavior, to see how systemic barriers remain even when we wish them away, and to see how much we all gain when we celebrate the richness of Black identity and culture. This is not about assigning blame. It is about taking responsibility for building a society that is honest about its history and courageous enough to create a different future. The strength of those who survived slavery was not only in enduring suffering, but in creating community, art, and hope against all odds. Their descendants have carried forward that legacy of resilience and creativity, offering the world music that moves the soul, literature that challenges the mind, and movements that call us all to justice. Their story is not one of victimhood but of triumph, and it invites everyone, no matter their background, to join in the ongoing work of liberation. Dismantling systemic racism is not an act of charity. It is a commitment to the shared humanity that binds us all. Each of us has a role to play. We can educate ourselves and others, challenge the stereotypes that still linger, support policies that foster equity, and uplift the voices of those too often silenced. We can carry forward the truth that freedom is a collective achievement, not a solitary pursuit. And as we do this work, we not only honor those who fought before us, but also ensure that the next generation inherits something far richer than trauma, a legacy of justice, empathy, and shared purpose. Thank you for taking the time to walk through these stories, to listen with an open mind, and to reflect on the hidden legacies that shape the world we live in today. If this journey has sparked thought, inspired hope, or challenged you to see history and yourself in a new way, please help us continue the conversation. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss future explorations into the truths that history has left us. Your support helps these stories reach more people and keeps the dialogue alive. Together, by facing the past and embracing the fullness of Black identity and culture, we can loosen the grip of those old mental chains and move, step by step, toward the true freedom that belongs to all of us.